A 64-year-old woman stated that her trafficking started at the tender age of 6. She was lured here to America with the promise of a better education. What's worse about this story is that the people that she loved the most, her family members, were the ones who sold her into slavery. She admitted that at the age of 6, she had to assume a whole different identity. And in her own words, how can you rage against a system when your family members were the one who sold you into it? She admits that this still affects her to this day after 20 years of slavery, because she knows and understands that there are more children out there being used as sex slaves today. Hi, everyone. My name is Syria Aaron, and I am a residential aide at a Salvation Army transitional shelter for women who identify as sex trafficking victims. Today, I want you to walk away with a better understanding of how sex trafficking rings operate as organized criminal enterprises that use grooming processes to lure their victims into trafficking and sexual exploitation. We will discuss the steps of a victim's journey to recovery, and lastly, we will also discuss solutions to child sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. When addressing child sexual exploitation and sex trafficking, I want to talk about 3 important aspects. The first aspect is the misunderstanding that child sexual exploitation is an individual problem versus a worldwide problem. Certain misunderstandings can lead people to believe that it's an individual problem. However, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children recorded 16.9 million reports related to child sexual exploitation online. In 2020, that number jumped with a 25% increase to 21.8 million. This is why I think that sex trafficking rings and sexual exploitation of children should be deemed as organized criminal enterprises that violate human rights of vulnerable populations. The Omnibus Crime Control and Safety Act of 1968 defined organized crime as illegal criminal enterprises that supply illegal goods and services. Homeland Security added that they are profit-driven, uphold certain attributes and characteristics such as legitimate businesses, structure, restricted memberships, violence or threats of violence, and corruption. Victims of sexual exploitation and organized criminal enterprises may have a harder time escaping because trafficking rings and exploiters operate as organized criminal enterprises that are structured in a way that a victim cannot escape and receive help. Now that we have talked about organized criminal enterprises, I would like to speak about the grooming process. And this is very important for everyone to learn, because as members of our community, we all have a family member that this information can be passed along to. Okay, first I would like to highlight that victims of sexual exploitation and sex trafficking are usually poor children, runaways, and homeless children. And as members of our community, it's our duty to learn about the process of grooming. The Polaris Project stated that most traffickers operate by building trust with their victims and then manipulating them into sex trafficking. Braley defined the grooming as a process in which the exploiter spends time making the victim feel comfortable, in which they build their trust with their victims and then manipulate them into sexual slavery or exploitation. This can come in the form of compliments, flirting, treating children like adults, professing their love to a child. Grooming can go anywhere from 2 days to a year. In the Jane Doe versus Facebook case, the trafficker groomed his victim for a year before meeting her and exploiting her. The third thing that I would like to talk to you about is recovery, a victim journey to recovery. The first thing that we need to speak about is a safe place. That's the first thing that we need to address with the victim of sex trafficking, is a safe place to stay for the night. And Dr. Thema Davis and clinical psychologist Robin Gobbin stated that there are few shelters and programs for victims of human trafficking, and the ones that are around, they require victims to identify themselves as a victim. And that's another aspect in its own because of trauma bonds. Whenever we deal with acts of violence, victims often form a bond with their oppressors. And it's usually a hard thing to try to get victims to admit that they are a victim. Now, Davis and Gobbin also reported that survivors reported mental health distress, PTSD, depression, anxiety disorder, suicidal thoughts, addiction, dissatisfaction, distrust, disconnection, and complex trauma. And as of working with the Salvation Army, we also address housing, legal needs, such as identification cards, birth certificates, social security cards, educational and vocational assistance, therapy, medical care, and rehabilitation services. We also know that survivors often have to take medications just to get through their day. Now that we have talked about sex trafficking rings as organized criminal enterprises and that uses grooming processes to lure their victims, and we spoke about a victim's recovery, I would like to speak about solutions. The first thing that we can do is learn signs that identify victims of sexual exploitation. Second, we can download ways to help suspected victims. Third, we could donate to an organization dedicated to assisting children of sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. The Philadelphia Children's Alliance provides professionals trained to assist and advocate for sexually abused children. They offer victim services for families of sexual abused children, such as forensic interviews, crisis counseling, and educations about the processes and journeys. They offer mental health therapy, medical services, court accompaniment, and specialized therapists that work with children in that area. And now that we have talked about sex trafficking rings as organized criminal enterprises that use grooming processes to lure their victims and a victim's journey to recovery, I would like for you to just think about that for a second and also take a time to look at the cyber tip line, electronic service reports. Providers reports about sex trafficking online and get a better understanding of what's actually taking place online with children. Thank you.